Hey everyone, this is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today we are going to take a look at Venus's square with Uranus, which is perfecting tomorrow. We took a look at this earlier in the week. We're going to take one more look today alongside of the I Ching. We're going to have a tarot card that I drew to help us with this transit as well. So happy Friday, by the way. I hope you guys are getting excited for the weekend. Don't forget that the first week of April, two announcements. First week of April, I have a sale that I will be running on all of my programs, including my spring programs that start in June. The next class, my Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic program, starts in the month of June, and you will be able to get the same rate that I offered during the Kickstarter program for 1 week, the first week of April. The other announcement is that my speaker series begins this weekend and next weekend. So if you go to my website, I'll just take you there right now and show you how you can sign up. Really good list of speakers that are coming up for this particular series. Let me go ahead and put this on the screen so you can see it. So if you go to nightlightastrology.com and click on the events tab, the speaker series tab, and then scroll down and you will see March 20th, Martine Hermes is giving a talk on Hellenistic aspect doctrine. This is learning all about aspects in ancient astrology. And then next weekend, Ren Butler on the 26th and Jen Zart on the 27th, giving talks on archetypal astrology and gemstones in astrology. These are all free. So all you have to do is visit nightlightastrology.com, go to the events page, you can click and sign up. There's a free replay available for a week afterward on the website too. So if you can't make it live, you can always go back and watch the replay if you sign up. All right, so all of that out of the way, let's take a look at the real-time clock and refresh ourselves on this Uranus transit. And let's see here. Okay, here we go. And so you can see Venus at about 11 degrees of Aquarius right now. And if we fast forward one day, we're just going to go forward one full day, then you'll see that Venus crosses over the square to Uranus and Taurus tomorrow, March 19th. So again, we took a look at this earlier in the week. Today, we're going to kind of unpack the same transit on a deeper level, looking at the I Ching. I did a reading this morning to get a little bit more insight about this transit, and also picked a tarot card to get a little bit more insight. So hopefully you guys will find this interesting. So I'm going to begin by just refreshing on a few of the main signatures of Venus and Uranus, which everyone should be quite familiar with by now. Venus is a planet that loves harmony. Uranus is a planet that loves disruption. And so there is often, when Venus meets Uranus, especially in squares and oppositions, which are of the nature of Mars and Saturn, these quote unquote difficult aspects, you will see disruption to harmony. Where you are looking for peace or agreement, you will find disruption to it. So that's a Venus-Uranus dynamic. On the other hand, if Venus represents our aesthetic, let's say, then this is about innovation surrounding one's aesthetic. If you are looking for love, then this can be innovation in relation to who you date or who you sleep with. If you're looking for an aesthetic, a design, a presentation of beauty, well, then Uranus can break the mold and give you something unexpected. So you're mixing the themes of beauty, love, agreement, harmony with innovation / disruption, with things that defy the status quo or normalcy, but also may disrupt or challenge and defy something that, if you're seeking agreement, Uranus can break that apart by emphasizing that individuals have differing ideas and that peace becomes difficult. It's difficult to reach an agreement. But not usually because of conflict as much as because of individuality or some kind of deviation from a norm or something like that, like a more of a theme of rebellion. So I went over a lot of those themes early in the week. And what I want to do now is focus in a little bit more on what the I Ching and Tarot had to say when I asked to help refine the interpretation for us. So I'm going to start with the Tarot because it's a little bit simpler. The I Ching takes a little explaining. So the card that I drew is the 10 of Wands. And the 10 of Wands is, first of all, it's the last card of the fire suit, the wands being associated with the element of fire. And when you reach that 10, you're really pushing toward completion. You can see he's got a big load of like wood, and he's carrying the wands toward what looks like a home or a, someplace in the distance that he's carrying them to. He's almost there. It's the completion card, but it's like kind of stumbling through the finish line. Crossing card that I drew, which says, okay, well, if this is what the 10 is trying to accomplish, then, what's holding it back or what's challenging it? And this card came up, which is the 7 of Wands. You can see this guy has two different shoes on, two different types of shoes, and he's like dealing with a lot of different, there's a look, almost looks like he's fending off or dealing with adversity or a whole bunch of challenging wands below him, but he's kind of got one foot in the river, one foot on the land, two different shoes. So one thing that I thought was really interesting about this, when you put these two cards together, is you have a picture of trying to complete something, but having a lot of irons in the fire, or just simply struggling to get something done. I think of Venus Uranus, and one of the things that Venus is going to represent quite often is the natural desire for completion. When you think about completion of a project, or when you think about reaching the conclusion of a process of some kind, you're often thinking about the moment where you go, okay, the goal has been realized, and you can kind of enjoy it. And that's a Venusian moment. Well, when Venus hits Uranus, sometimes it's really hard. Sometimes it's like, it's not just an easy crossing of the finish line. When I look at these two cards, I see someone struggling with maybe conflicting agendas, or a multiplicity of information or people or things that are difficult to deal with all at once. You're trying to complete something, trying to reach resolution, which is very Venusian. For example, the 7th house, the place of the setting sun, not associated with Venus per se, but was associated with kama, with pleasure, in Indian astrology, for example, and with the consummation or completion of activities and work. And so that's a place of pleasure. And that's the place where planets set, and you move into the evening, where Venus naturally finds herself at home. And we have an association, long-time association with the 7th house and love, just as Venus is the planet that represents that place. So when you think about the desire to complete something, you're kind of like, okay, let's put the hard work of the day behind us. Let's move into that kind of nocturnal space of enjoyment and relaxation, where the toil and work is done. These two cards suggest, like, there could be some interruption to the peace or some difficulty in reaching that state of resolution, whether it's at work or in a relationship or whatever, that you're pushing and straining and trying to finish something or reach agreement, a place of peace, but you're struggling to do so because of a variety of competing or conflicting issues, interests, or challenges. That's very Venus square Uranus. One of the main themes of Venus square Uranus, quite frankly, is a little bit of chaos, disturbing the peace, right? So I would be, if, as personally, like we're leaving town to go celebrate my mother's retirement. She's a longtime nurse and she's retiring, so we're leaving town to celebrate her retirement. And I'm just thinking, like, getting out of town could be a little chaotic, like this, and with kids and everything, like, that's to be expected. But when I know Venus is square Uranus, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to get into high anxiety and stress mode more than I need to, knowing that it might be a little tricky for the next couple of days for for peace to not have a little Uranian buzz around it, which is naturally disruptive, but also at times surprising and interesting. I mean, the flip side of those cards, which I think today, I feel like different readings I do with the I Ching has slightly different advice, but these cards to me are just saying like, if you want to complete something, just know that it could be a little bit chaotic right now to do so. And if I know that, that actually gives me some peace. The other thing about those cards I will say is that one maybe warning is if you are trying to finish something or accomplish something, but you've got complete competing interests or conflicting values, streamlining things and figuring out how to get everyone on the same page so that you have less, almost like what's the saying from the Bible? I think a house divided against itself cannot stand, or something like that. It's kind of that advice. It's like if you've got differing agendas and you're trying to finish something or get something done, that could sort of disrupt or mess things up right now. So that's what I see the card saying. Now, when it comes to the advice of the I Ching, let me just bring up a number of different texts to go to. So this is a good reading today. So the hexagram that I pulled this morning for when asking about some additional advice or insight into Venus's square to Uranus was hexagram 21. Hexagram 21 is sometimes called biting through, and it's often depicted as an object that's stuck between the teeth that has to be like forcibly gnawed or bitten through. And it often carries with it the idea of like a penalty or application of the law, or even having to deal with like a consequence. It's like there's an obstacle to union being the joining of the upper and lower mouth. And rather than closing, there's like an obstacle to them closing and they have to bite through it. So, when I think about that, I think, yeah, it's very Venus-Uranus. Venus square Uranus would be the potential for there to be an obstacle to union or harmony. Just like in the card, the guy's he's trying to complete something. And then the conflicting card was the 7 of Wands to the 10 of Wands. Same idea, that there's an obstacle to union being a Venusian state. And the obstacle is one of differing values, ideas, agendas, personalities, individual characters, and not necessarily evil or bad or just different. And sometimes this hexagram is also associated with the process of differentiating things. So by chewing, for example, you take a solid thing and you break it down into parts. It's a process of differentiation that then brings union, because the object in the mouth is being chewed up. So what I find interesting about this is just a little bit of a warning about this weekend containing some obstacles to union because of things that need to be further differentiated, further maybe even separated out or something like that. So in this hexagram, one of the things that is at play here is how do you work through a challenge to harmonious union, an unexpected challenge to harmonious union. If you're in a group, it's that one voice that doesn't agree. Or if you're in a group and you're trying to get one thing done, it's a variety of different voices that have conflicting ideas about how something should be done. If you're in a marriage, it might be differing parenting strategy and you're just not on the same page about it. If you're in a relationship, it could be that you have very different goals or values spiritually, and they're coming into play at a time where you have to make a choice about your future together, where you're going to live or something else. So what we're talking about here is there's the need to understand differences that exist while at the same time seeking union. There's an object in between or something that could present a block or an obstacle to agreement, union, or some kind of happy ending, and it has to be dealt with. So when that's the case, because that's the case, We have to adjust and act according to what's required of us in the moment, coming up with a creative solution that can acknowledge different parts, different personalities, and basically innovate. So I think that's a very Venus-Uranus message. If you want harmony, be innovative, be creative about the solution that you find. Now, what I found really interesting was the line that was changing was let's see, it was the third line. So here's the enlightenment through the third line translation from one website that I really like, which is I Ching 123. To adjust and act according to what is required, a lenient enforcer unable to apply the strict penal code deals with a repeat offender. He encounters trouble like biting hard-aged meat and contracting food poisoning. He will feel resentful. However, since the law available is strict, he can be free from calamity or fault if he makes a correction, i.e. executes the penal code correctly and forcefully. He goes on to talk about some of the lines. Line 3 is at the position for marching upward to the upper trigram, i.e. like high society. It is an ambitious but inept speculator in the time of great strife and is pursuing material gains. It loots salted and preserved meat and contracts food poisoning as a result. That's interesting. There's a couple of different interpretations we're going to read. That's not the only one, but there's a few things going on here. One would be that there's something from the past, like a problem from the past that keeps coming up, and that someone is not dealing with it. They're trying to cut corners or maybe get away with something, and they're not dealing with a repeated error or problem that has its roots in the past that keeps coming up, and they either don't have the fortitude or the character or the willpower to like correct it and make it better, and they might be trying to cut corners around it. That's interesting. That's a very Venus-Uranus type of thing in terms of trying to deviate, cut corners, break rules in order to get something that you want. But there's a few other translations that I really like as well. This one comes from, the line actually reads, biting on dried meat, running into poison. There is a little shame, but no blame. And then one translator writes, the man or the person, we'll just say, lacks sufficient power and authority, and the culprit does not submit to him. It is like biting through an old dried meat and coming up upon something poisonous. Some humiliation results, but no blame. The James DeCorn writes this: the issue is an old one. A magnetic line in a dynamic place suggests weakness or passivity, which is unable to deal very effectively with a long-standing problem. Implicit also is the idea of confronting something disagreeable within one's own psyche. You may be impotent in coming to grips with an old issue. Recognition and acceptance of this are the first steps toward initiating needed reforms. And then another translation says, you lack sufficient power and authority to bring about a reform. Your attempts meet with indifference, and you may feel humiliated at your ineffective actions. Yet reform is necessary, and therefore your endeavors are justified. So, and then one more translation, which I will read for you. Biting on old dried meat and strike on something poisonous, slight humiliation, no blame. Punishment is to be carried out by someone who, and we could say punishment might be any enforcing of a consequence or a change of behavior or a reform. It doesn't, punishment may be too serious or heavy of a word. Punishment is to be carried out by someone who lacks the power and authority to do so. So the culprit doesn't submit. The matter at hand is an old one, as symbolized by salted meat, and in dealing with it, difficulties arise. This old meat is spoiled. By taking up the problem, the punisher arouses poisonous hatred against himself, and in this way is put in a somewhat humiliating position. But since punishment was required by the time, he remains free of blame. I think this funny image comes to my mind. It's like in a movie when someone tries to perform a citizen's arrest. I'm putting you under arrest by the power of the citizen's arrest. You know, the person in the grocery store who's you know, I don't know, stepping in line or something. So the idea here is that there might be something that you just lack the sufficient power to change or correct. And this could also be, in other words, Venus Uranus about some kind of rebellious part of yourself, some kind of rebellious faction, or some aspect of a relationship, or something in the workplace, or something in your children, or something in yourself that just doesn't want to play by the rules, or that just doesn't want to conform in some way. And you might try to get it to reform, but it's not really going to listen to you. And this is a way of saying, like, kind of sucks that you may not have the power to reform something or change something because it's just a little too rebellious, or it's just not going to conform. But sort of, I read this as saying sort of any effort, any attempt that you make is, even though it may not work, at least your heart's in the right place in recognizing, hey, this isn't the way it's supposed to be. Or, like I imagine, for example, that if had someone at work on a team that had a bad attitude, and you tried to like call them out a little bit, but you don't really have the power to do anything about it. It's like, well, you weren't out of line for asking them to shape up or to have a better attitude, but don't be too embarrassed or humiliated if they don't really listen, or if you don't really have the power to change it. And this is also, I think, a message for us about rebellion within ourselves. Like Venus Uranus could be like, hey, look, there's parts of you that are going to rebel, or that aren't going to want to play by the rules. And sometimes you'll have the power to like reel it in, and other times, shit's just going to happen, and there's going to be little rebellious aspects of yourself. And those things, those rebellious elements, if there's something that's warranted, some correction that's warranted, like, it'll take care of itself in time. You can't cut corners and get away with things forever. So even if right now you aren't the person to correct something, or you don't have the strength or power within yourself to correct something, don't worry. It's, even being aware of it but lacking the power is okay. Like it's a step in the right. And I think, for example, in a 12-step program, or people who are coping with addiction, I remember when I was going to the Amazon and drinking ayahuasca and using it to help me kick an opiate addiction that I had in my early 20s. I remember basically the first step, which I think is very similar in 12-step programs, was realizing that I'm somewhat powerless over my addiction. I'm like, but that was a huge step to even realize that, to even realize how little power I had over the dynamic. That actually paradoxically empowered me. So in realizing that there might be restless or rebellious factions in something or somewhere, or some block to peace or resolution, and just recognizing, okay, this is a difficult situation, and I maybe don't have all of the pieces or power to like make it all good. You've already, by recognizing that, moved one step closer to peace. And as long as we're not, participating with elements that want to justify or keep some kind of bad habit in place to our own detriment, or we're trying to cut corners and justify things that really aren't good, and delude ourselves, that's the real problem. It's not like, sometimes you have your smoke, let's say, you should quit, but you just don't have the power to do so. It's okay. What this hexagram to me and this line would be saying is, don't try to convince yourself that it's just fine, but don't try to convince yourself that don't be surprised if you can't really change it yet either. So I see that, like, some of these teachings are so nuanced, such good little nuanced teachings for Venus Uranus. And the same can be true with your kids. You may not have the power to correct something your teenager is doing, but it's better than pretending like, oh, they're fine, they're angels, they're not doing anything. You have awareness of it. It might feel tortured to have awareness of something that's seeking union but can't get there, and you feel sort of powerless about it. But actually having some awareness about it and not trying to delude yourself that it is something it isn't. So example, this person's biting into a piece of food and comes to realize there's something rotten in it. They taste it and it's like, ugh, okay, well, better to do that and stop, than try to eat the whole thing and pretend like it's just fine. So I think that's probably the most valuable teaching that I could find in this hexagram. One thing that's interesting is this. One other thing about this line that came to my mind, if I could just find my notes, Okay, so here's the need for reform, but not the authority to perform the reform. Ineffective of bringing about reform due to disobedient factions or differing factions, we'll call them. Can't deal with an old issue. Weakness or passivity when dealing with an old issue. The desire to skirt around and make excuses and sidestep something, justify something that will maybe something that's festered that you need to recognize, even if you don't have the power to change it right away. Confronting something or someone disagreeable, but not having the sufficient power to change it. Poisoned by an unwilling attitude within ourselves or some element around us. But this is temporary, and even just being aware of it and doing our best is good. I think that's what I take away from all of this. So a number of different takes on Venus Uranus today that are a little different than like, okay, you're going to go get plastic surgery or an interesting tattoo, or there's going to be, you're going to try some kind of kinky sex position, or, like just the normal Venus Uranus stuff. Okay, disruption around love, or there's, I think there's more nuance here and understanding, like Venus Uranus, some innovation that's needed in trying to reach the peace, some disagreeable factions that could come up, and how do you deal with them? So watch for those elements as well. I'd love to hear your stories. Please share them in the comments section. Use the hashtag grabbed, and then put in Venus square Uranus and tell us your story, or email us grabbed@nightlightastrology.com. I am going to be leaving town. A lot of the videos that I have made videos in advance for while I am gone, according to all the transits that are unfolding. So you guys won't miss a beat, but if you're emailing, there may be a little delay in answering any emails that you guys have. Delia, my personal assistant, will be around answering emails. Content will flow as usual. Hope you guys enjoy the speaker series. Be sure to check that out. If you're contacting me for any reason, like I said, it's going to be probably like a week before I get back to you for anything. If people are ordering readings off my website too, if they're recorded readings anyway, probably about a week delay before I get to them. Just know that for the next week. All right. Well, I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend and that you have lots of good Venus Uranus stories to tell. I really look forward to hearing them, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye.